Before Pine Hollow had a name, long before Pine Hollow was called Pine Hollow, it was simply the clearing, a small wound cut into the forest. The trees there were older than memory, their trunks thick and scarred, their roots tangled beneath the soil like veins. Winters came early and left late. Snow piled high enough to swallow fences, barns, even entire houses if no one dug fast enough. People didn't come here because they wanted to. They came because they had nowhere else to go. The first settlers were desperate, families fleeing famine, disease, wars that followed them like ghosts. They built their homes too close together, as if warmth could be shared by proximity alone. But winter took anyway. Children died first, then the old, then the weak. And when hunger set in, when the snow refused to melt, and the forest offered nothing but silence, the bells rang for the first time. No one admitted to hanging them. No one claimed to own them. But they rang, soft, patient, persistent, and something followed the sound. Eleanor's first Christmas. My grandmother was 12 the first time she saw it. She wrote about that night in the notebook, but not as a warning, as a confession. It came during a winter worse than any before it. Crops failed completely. Livestock froze in their stalls. The river cracked open and swallowed a man whole when he tried to cross it. On Christmas Eve, the bells rang from the forest. People gathered in the town hall, clutching candles, whispering prayers to gods that had already turned away. That was when it stepped out from between the trees, tall, red, smiling. It spoke with a voice that made grown men cry, not from fear, but relief. It promised warmth, food, an end to winter. All it asked was that one child be given a new purpose, not taken, chosen. Eleanor remembered her mother's hand tightening around hers. She remembered the way the crowd slowly turned, and she remembered the moment she understood something far worse than fear. The town was willing. The first coat. The first red coat was sewn that very night. Not from fabric bought or traded, but from clothing already owned. Sleeves from a father's jacket, buttons from a dead woman's dress, lining taken from blankets meant for children who would never use them. The coat wasn't given to the child. The child grew into it. And when the bells rang the following winter, they rang from inside the town, why Eleanor was allowed to live. My grandmother survived that first Christmas for one reason. She understood. Most children screamed, cried, fought, tried to run when the bells grew louder and the red figure stepped closer. Fear made them loud, and loud things were fragile. Eleanor wasn't. She watched. She noticed how the thing in red never forced anyone, how it waited, how it spoke softly, choosing words the way a surgeon chooses tools. She noticed that the bells didn't ring to command, but to invite. And she noticed something else. The child chosen that night did not look afraid. He looked relieved. That realization lodged itself deep in Eleanor's chest and stayed there for the rest of her life. When the coat was finally placed on the boy's shoulders, when the bells fell silent and warmth returned to the town, Eleanor didn't cry like the others. She memorized everything instead. The way the snow softened, the way people breathed easier, the way guilt settled in like a second winter. That was why she was spared, not out of mercy, out of usefulness. The mistake that could never be repeated. The notebook spoke of one winter the town tried to break the cycle. It happened decades later, when Eleanor was already a grown woman. The child chosen that year ran, not far, but far enough. He crossed the salt lines. He screamed for his mother. He refused the coat. The bells rang louder than ever before. That winter, the snow didn't stop. 3 houses collapsed under its weight. The river swallowed 2 more people. Food spoiled overnight. Children fell sick without explanation. The thing in red did not rage. It simply waited. And when the town finally begged, when they dragged the boy back through the forest, half frozen and sobbing, the bells stopped instantly. The lesson was clear. The role could not be rejected, only delayed. The child who wore it too long. There was another story Eleanor wrote reluctantly, about a man who wore the coat too long. Most carried the role for decades, some for a lifetime. But one, his name erased deliberately, refused to pass it on. He liked the warmth, the certainty, the way the town looked at him with gratitude and fear woven together. He liked being needed, so he stopped listening. He stopped teaching. That was the year children began to disappear outside of Christmas. That was the year the forest grew restless. That was the year the forest grew restless. And that was the year the bells rang without hands to carry them. The coat was taken from him, violently. The town never spoke his name again, and the rules became stricter. Caleb's childhood. I remembered things differently now. Christmas mornings where I woke to silence instead of excitement. The way my parents never laughed on Christmas Eve. The way my grandmother always stood near the window after sunset, listening. I remembered once, when I was 9, hearing bells in my sleep. I'd gone downstairs. I'd stepped over a salt line, and I'd seen red fabric hanging in the dark, like a shadow with weight. My grandmother had found me moments later, shaking, unable to speak. She never punished me. She just cried. That was the night she knew. Why Seth was already chosen. Seth wasn't random. None of them ever were. The notebook explained that the same soul always returned, not by memory but by tendency. A child who listened more than spoke, who felt responsible for quiet things, who sensed when balance was wrong. Seth had watched the forest longer than other children. He'd heard the bells in his dreams. By the time I reached him at the tree line, the choice had already been made. I was just fulfilling it. The bells change hands. Walking through the forest with Seth felt familiar. The bells hung from my wrist now, lighter than they had ever been. They rang only when I moved, only when I allowed them to. That sound, Seth said softly, it makes things calm. It's supposed to, I replied, but only if you respect it. He nodded, serious. He would be good at this. That thought should have horrified me. It didn't. What Christmas really is. Christmas was never about gifts, it was about continuity. About a story people told themselves so they wouldn't have to look too closely at what kept them warm. The coat, the bells, the child who learned instead of dying. By the time the snow fell heavier again, Seth was already asking questions. Good ones. The kind that meant the cycle would continue cleanly. Seth's first Christmas Eve. Seth didn't ask where we were going. That was the first sign he would survive. The forest opened slightly as we walked, the trees leaning away just enough to let us pass. Snow settled on branches but never touched us. The bells at my wrist chimed softly, not with warning, but with rhythm. This is the night, I told him. The one everyone waits for, he asked. The one everyone pretends is harmless, I replied. We reached a small clearing I remembered from other lives, a place where the snow always lay smoother, untouched by wind. The air was warmer here, though no fire burned. I took the coat from my shoulders. For the first time in centuries, it felt heavy again. You don't put it on yet, I said. Not tonight. Seth frowned. Why not? Because tonight, you learn. The teaching. We sat together in the snow. I told him everything. Not all at once, but carefully, in layers, about Pine Hollow, about the winters that would come if no one listened, about the difference between protection and control, about why fear made the bells ring louder and understanding made them soften. He listened without interrupting. Children like Seth always did. When do I wear it? He finally asked. When you stop asking why, I said gently, and start asking how. He nodded. The forest exhaled. What the town never sees back in Pine Hollow, lights glowed warmly. Families gathered. Plates were filled. Laughter returned to places where it had been absent for weeks. They would never see us. They never did. All they knew was that winter would loosen its grip, that no one would starve, that the cold would behave. They called it luck. They called it tradition. They never called it what it was. Payment. The last lesson Eleanor gave me. I thought of my grandmother then, not as she was at the end, but as she had been when I was small, standing in doorways, watching, waiting, preparing me without ever naming what I was becoming. She had never lied. She had simply waited for the moment when the truth would no longer be avoidable. In that way, she had been kinder than most. On passing the wait, as dawn approached, the sky lightened just enough to suggest morning. I stood and held the coat open. Seth rose slowly. Next year, he asked, Yes, I said. Not before. He reached out and touched the fabric. The bells chimed once. Approval. The coat would recognize him when the time came. The final shape of things. By the time we returned to the edge of the forest, Pine Hollow was fully awake.